Arthur Morgan stood on his porch at dawn, pocket watch open in his palm. 6:47, the stagecoach was late. A February wind cut across the Montana Territory like a promise of hardship. Snow crusted the earth in gray patches. His ranch house stood substantial behind him, 2 stories with good bones, but filled with empty rooms that echoed when he walked them alone. It had been 3 years since Eleanor died, 3 years of cooking for one, talking to horses, and forgetting what another person's voice sounded like across the breakfast table. The mail-order arrangement had seemed practical. A woman needed security, he needed something. Companionship without the vulnerability of courtship. A transaction both could understand. Dust rose on the horizon. Arthur straightened his coat, touching Eleanor's ring in his vest pocket, the one he'd stopped wearing but couldn't bring himself to bury. His throat went dry. The stagecoach pulled up in a spray of frozen mud. The driver grinned down at him with knowing cruelty. "Your package, Morgan." A woman stepped down, dressed in a simple dark traveling coat, her face hidden by a heavy veil. She moved carefully, like someone used to being watched. Arthur approached, his prepared greeting dying on his lips. "Mr. Morgan," her voice was steady, controlled. "I am Mylin." She lifted the veil. He froze. Her face was not what he expected. Delicate, with high cheekbones and almond-shaped eyes that held a story of a world away. She was Chinese. The contrast between his expectation and the reality before him made Arthur's breath catch. Every polite word he'd rehearsed vanished. Mylin read his face with the accuracy of someone who had spent years being assessed and judged. Her shoulders set, and her chin lifted. "The agency didn't tell you," she said flatly. "I understand if the contract is void. I can take the next stage east." Arthur's mind raced. He'd imagined someone plain, someone practical. He'd imagined normal. But standing before him was a woman who had crossed an ocean and a continent, who had survived things he couldn't imagine and kept standing anyway. Her eyes held no plea for pity, only exhausted dignity. He heard Eleanor's voice, clear as church bells. "Do the right thing, Arthur. Be better than your fear." "Agreement stands." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Welcome to the Morgan Ranch, Miss Lynn." Her surprise was visible, a slight widening of her eyes, a catch in her breath. The driver spat tobacco juice into the snow. "Good luck, Morgan." "You'll need it." Arthur ignored him, reaching for Lynn's small trunk. She moved past him toward the house, her back straight despite obvious exhaustion. He watched her walk up his porch steps and into his home, and realized he had just made a choice he didn't fully understand. The wind picked up as the stagecoach pulled away. Arthur stood alone in his yard holding a stranger's trunk, wondering what kind of man he was about to become. Mylin moved through the Morgan house like she was cataloging a ledger. Torn curtains, dust on every surface, a kitchen of sparse bachelor provisions with nothing fresh, floors unswept in weeks. She didn't ask permission. She simply set down her small bag and began working. Arthur watched from the kitchen doorway, uncertain whether to help or retreat. She had shed her heavy coat. Her dress was threadbare but clean, mended in a dozen places with careful stitches. "You don't have to," he started. "Where do you keep the cleaning rags?" She didn't look at him. Under the basin, but she found them and started wiping down the kitchen table. Her movements were efficient, practiced, a woman who had worked hard for a long time. Arthur cleared his throat. "I'll show you the bedrooms. You should take the..." "I'll take the maid's room," Mylin said, nodding toward the small room off the kitchen. "That one." "That's not, you should have the proper bedroom." She finally looked at him. "Mr. Morgan, let us be clear about the terms. I am here to work, to keep house, cook, and mend. Nothing more is expected or offered. The small room is sufficient." Her words were a wall, carefully built. Arthur wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. She had already turned back to her cleaning, dismissing him without rudeness, just with clear boundaries. He retreated to the barn. Dinner was salt pork and beans. My Lin cooked with a competence that spoke of lean years and empty cupboards conquered through sheer will. They sat across the table from each other as the cutlery scraped loud against the plates. "How long have you been alone here?" My Lin asked, breaking 5 minutes of silence. 3 years. My wife died. Childbirth. The words came out flat. He'd said them so many times they'd lost their texture. "I'm sorry, it was God's will," he said, not believing it anymore but not knowing what else to say. My Lin nodded and said nothing more. They finished eating in silence. The marriage license sat on the mantel, unsigned. Both of them saw it, but neither mentioned it. My Lin washed the dishes with methodical precision. Arthur escaped to the barn again, checking on horses that didn't need checking. When he finally returned to the house, her door was closed. A thin line of lamplight showed beneath it. Arthur lay in his bed, Eleanor's bed, staring at the ceiling. He could hear My Lin moving in her room, small sounds of a stranger's presence in his home. He knew nothing about her beyond her quiet resilience. "What have I done?" he thought. In her small room, My Lin stood at the window, looking toward the barn's dark silhouette. One week, she whispered to her reflection. "If he sends me back, I'll go west somewhere no one knows me." She would survive. She always did. Saturday morning, they rode to town for supplies. My Lin wore her veil again. Arthur noticed but didn't comment. The wagon ride stretched on in silence, the frozen ruts jolting them in a shared rhythm. As the false front buildings of Bitterroot came into view, My Lin's shoulders tightened. Arthur saw her preparing for battle. They hitched the wagon outside the general store. Conversation stopped as they walked past. Heads turned. Whispers started like wind through dry grass. Mrs. Hartwell, the preacher's wife, intercepted them at the store entrance, her smile bright and performative. "Mr. Morgan, and this must be your arrangement." She looked at My Lin with exaggerated compassion. "Bless you, dear girl, and bless you, Mr. Morgan, for your Christian charity, offering a home to one of these poor souls." My Lin's jaw tightened, her hands fisted in her skirt. "We need supplies, Mrs. Hartwell." Arthur's voice was flat. Of course, of course. I'll pray for you both." She sailed past, radiating satisfaction. Inside, My Lin selected flour, sugar, and coffee with quiet efficiency. The shopkeeper's wife stared openly. 2 young women whispered behind the fabric bolts, giggling. Arthur felt heat rising in his collar, shame, not of My Lin, but of his town, his neighbors, of himself for bringing her into this. Outside, while loading supplies, Marcus Dalton blocked their path. Tall, well-dressed, and mean-eyed, he owned the Triple D ranch and thought that made him king. "Heard you bought mail order, Morgan." Dalton's grin was razor-sharp. "Didn't know they were running a charity service for the Orient now." Arthur's hand stilled on the supply sack. Dalton tipped his hat to My Lin with exaggerated courtesy. "Brave of you to be seen in a respectable town." My Lin's expression didn't change. She picked up a sack of flour and carried it to the wagon herself. "What did that arrangement cost you, Morgan?" Dalton continued. "Or did they pay you to take her off their hands?" Arthur's fists clenched. Words tangled in his throat, caught between propriety and rage, between what was proper and what was right. He said nothing. My Lin climbed into the wagon, her back straight, her face blank. Arthur loaded the last of the supplies in silence and climbed up beside her. Dalton's laughter followed them down Main Street. The ride home stretched longer than the ride in. Miles of silence passed. Arthur's knuckles were white on the reins. Finally, quietly, she spoke. "You don't owe me defense, Mr. Morgan." "Maybe I owe myself one," he said. She looked at him then, really looked, and something shifted in her eyes. Not hope, exactly, but a crack in her armor. That night, Arthur sat at his kitchen table, the marriage license before him. It was just paper, a technicality. He could send her back with no legal obligation. Signed, it was a promise. He thought of Dalton's sneer, Mrs. Hartwell's loud pity, the way My Lin had lifted that flour sack alone while he stood frozen. He thought of Eleanor, what she would say. Be better than your fear, Arthur. He signed his name, then slid the paper across the table. Mylin emerged from her room, wrapped in a shawl. She stared at the license, at his signature, bold and black. Why now? Her voice was barely audible. Because I made a promise. I keep my promises. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen. She signed her name beside his, Mylin Morgan. The contract became a covenant, though neither of them knew exactly what kind. March arrived with mud and melting snow, 6 weeks since Mylin had stepped off that stagecoach. The house had transformed. New curtains sewn from fabric she found in the attic brightened the windows. The floors gleamed. The kitchen smelled of bread and coffee instead of dust and neglect. Arthur found himself listening for her movements, the swish of her skirts, the soft humming she did while kneading dough, small sounds that made the house feel alive. One morning, he came in from checking fences to find his torn winter coat laid across the table, mended. The stitches were tiny and perfect, stronger than the original seam. My mother used to stitch like this, he said. Mylin looked up from the stove. Mine, too. It was their first shared memory. Small, but it counted. Late March brought an unexpected blizzard. Arthur made it to the barn barely in time, secured the horses, and fought his way back through whiteout conditions. They were trapped inside for 3 days. The first day, they were careful, polite. Mylin cooked. Arthur brought in firewood. They spoke only about necessities. The second day, proximity softened the edges. Arthur taught Mylin to play checkers. She was terrible at it, apologetically so. He found himself laughing, a rusty sound, but real. You're letting me win, she accused. I'm trying not to, he grinned. You're just that bad. She threw a wooden checker at him. He caught it, still grinning. On the third day, she read aloud from Eleanor's books of poetry. Arthur mostly watched her, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the way she got lost in the words and forgot to be guarded. That evening, she fell asleep in the chair by the fire, the book open in her lap. Arthur stood over her, his heart pounding. In sleep, her face was peaceful. She looked younger, vulnerable. He knew he shouldn't touch her, they had their boundaries, their careful distance. But he lifted her anyway. She was lighter than he expected. He carried her to her room and laid her gently on the narrow bed. She murmured something and turned into the pillow, but didn't wake. Arthur stood in the doorway, his hands shaking. He was falling, and he was terrified. The next morning, Mylin woke in her bed, confused. The last thing she remembered was reading by the fire. Her book sat on the nightstand. He had carried her, touched her, been gentle. She pressed her palm to her side where his hands would have been, her own heart hammering. In the kitchen, Arthur poured coffee with unsteady hands. The ground had shifted. There was no going back now. April exploded green across Montana. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. Birds returned, filling the dawn with song. The world was rebuilding itself. Arthur and Mylin planted the garden together. They worked side by side in the warm soil, their hands moving in a rhythm, dig, plant, cover, water. She hummed while she worked, an unconscious, natural tune Arthur didn't recognize. He stopped, leaned on his shovel, and just listened. She noticed his silence and stopped humming. Sorry, don't be, his voice was rough. Please, don't be. Their eyes met and held. Mylin looked away first, her cheeks flushed. On Saturday, Arthur rode to town alone and came back with a package wrapped in brown paper. He set it on the table, awkward. For you, Mylin unwrapped it slowly. It was blue calico fabric, soft, new, beautiful. Her eyes filled with tears. She touched it like it might disappear. Arthur, I can't. It's not charity, he cleared his throat. It's just, you deserve pretty things. She hadn't owned anything new in 8 years, had forgotten what it felt like to be given something just because. Thank you, she whispered, her voice full of heartfelt emotion. That night, she stayed up late, cutting pattern pieces by lamplight. Arthur pretended to read, but mostly watched her work. The house felt warm, full. One evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. A comfortable silence settled between them. She leaned her head against his shoulder, testing. Arthur went absolutely still, barely breathing. She didn't move away. His heart thundered. He turned slowly, his hand rising toward her face. His thumb traced her jaw, featherlight. My Lynn's breath caught. She didn't flinch. Her eyes searched his, dark and hopeful and frightened. He leaned closer. Eleanor's ghost rose between them. What if you fail her like you failed me? Arthur hesitated. Just a heartbeat, just a breath, but my Lynn felt it like ice water. The doubt, the fear. She pulled back and stood up. It's late. Good night, Arthur. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it sounded like goodbye. She disappeared inside. Arthur heard her door close and the soft click of the lock. He sat on the porch until midnight, his head in his hands, hating himself. Inside, my Lynn pressed her face into her pillow to muffle her sobs. The moment had been perfect, terrifying, real, and they had both let fear win. The next morning, the distance had returned. They were polite and careful, breaking their fast quietly. The blue fabric lay untouched on her table. Late in April, they rode to town for supplies. The air felt wrong, tense, expectant. My Lynn tied up the wagon while Arthur went into the general store. She heard voices around the corner. Mrs. Hartwell and two other women. That poor Mr. Morgan, trapped in a marriage of charity. They say she still sleeps in the maid's room. What kind of wife is that? It's shameful, really? He deserves better. I heard he can barely look at her. Who could blame him? Clara stood frozen behind the pickle barrels, nausea rising in her throat. She slipped away before they saw her, climbed into the wagon, and sat rigid, hands clenched. When Arthur returned with the supplies, he noticed her pallor. You all right? Fine. Let's go home. The ride back was silent, but something had broken. On Monday morning, Marcus Dalton rode up while Arthur was in the far pasture branding cattle. My Lynn answered the door, her apron dusty with flour. Dalton smiled and removed his hat. Mrs. Morgan. Mind if I speak plain? Speak however you like, Mr. Dalton. Then leave. His smile widened. I like you. Got spine. That's why I'm making this offer. He pulled an envelope from his coat. $500. Enough to go back east, start fresh somewhere. Morgan deserves a real wife. Someone he isn't ashamed to be seen with. You know it, and I know it. This just makes it easier on everyone. My Lynn's hands trembled. Get off this property to think about it. He didn't defend you in town. Froze up like a coward. That tell you anything? Dalton tipped his hat and rode off, leaving the envelope on the porch rail. My Lynn stared at it like a snake, not touching it. When Arthur returned at dusk, exhausted and dusty, My Lynn was packing. What are you doing? She didn't look at him. Do you regret it? Marrying me. My Lynn? Just answer. Do you regret it? Arthur's mind was a fog of exhaustion. He'd spent 12 hours wrestling cattle, breathing dust, burning brands into hide. It's complicated. It was the wrong answer. The worst answer. My Lynn's face went blank. I'll make it simple. I'll leave. Maybe. The words came from exhaustion, from fear, from 3 years of being half dead. Maybe that's best. It's not working. He meant my heart's not working. I don't know how to love again. I'm terrified. She heard you're not working. You're a mistake. I want you gone. I'll be gone by morning, she said, and finished packing. Arthur stood in the doorway, frozen, pride and fear strangling the truth. He walked to the barn and didn't come back. At dawn, My Lynn walked to town, her small trunk on her shoulder. The house behind her was silent, empty again. Arthur watched from the window as she became small on the horizon, then disappeared. He found the blue fabric on her table, untouched. Underneath it was a note in careful handwriting. "Thank you for trying to be kind. I'm sorry I wasn't enough." Arthur crumpled it and let it fall. He didn't pick it up for 3 days. The house exhaled and became a tomb again. 1 week without her. Arthur stopped eating properly, stopped shaving. The house was clean but dead. He cooked for one again, and the silence was unbearable. That Saturday, he rode to Eleanor's grave, his first visit in months. Rain soaked through his coat, but he didn't care. "I'm sorry," he told the headstone. "I thought avoiding love meant avoiding loss. But I lost her anyway." His voice broke. "And I lost you too, didn't I, Eleanor?" By holding on too tight, the rain fell. The grave didn't answer. But something in Arthur's chest loosened. Eleanor wasn't holding him back. He was holding himself back, using her memory as a shield against risk. "I'm still alive," he said aloud. "And I've been choosing wrong." Old Gus found Arthur drunk in the barn on Sunday night. The ranch hand was 70, tough as rawhide, and took no nonsense. "Boy, you're a damn fool." Arthur looked up, his eyes red. "Go away, Gus. That woman looked at you like you hung the moon, and you let her walk away because you were scared." Gus spat tobacco. "Eleanor would have boxed your ears." "Don't talk about Eleanor. I knew Eleanor longer than you did, boy. She'd tell you the same thing I'm telling you. Get your head out of your ass and fix this." Arthur tried to stand and swayed. Gus caught him. "You think you failed Eleanor? Maybe. But letting my Lynn go, thinking she wasn't worth fighting for, that's failure. Real failure. And you still have time to fix it." The words landed like hammer blows. Arthur sobered slowly, painfully, and saw clearly for the first time in days. He was choosing death over life. Again. My Lynn sat in the boarding house, a stagecoach ticket to Philadelphia on the nightstand. Departure was Monday morning. Mrs. Hartwell had offered her a charity position as a paid companion to an elderly widow. Kind work. Respectable. The pity prison rebuilt with better walls. My Lynn stared out the window at Bitterroot's Main Street, watching families and couples pass. Normal people with normal lives. She knew they would always see her as different. Maybe that was just the truth. But running was failure. Accepting less was failure. She would rather die free on the frontier than live small under their judgment. My Lynn tore up the stagecoach ticket. She didn't know what came next, but it wouldn't be running. Arthur rode to town on Sunday morning, bathed, shaved, his Sunday clothes pressed, his heart hammering. My Lynn stood at her boarding house window and saw him ride past, assuming he was going to church, perhaps to arrange an annulment. Her heart cracked further. But Arthur wasn't heading to a regular service. He was heading for the truth. Church bells rang. Time for a confession. He pushed through the church doors mid-sermon. Every head turned. The Reverend stopped mid-sentence. 50 faces stared. Whispers rose. Arthur removed his hat, scanned the pews, and found My Lynn in the back, pale and shocked. His boots echoed on the wood floor as he walked down the center aisle toward her, never breaking eye contact. Marcus Dalton smirked. The whole town held its breath. Arthur stopped at her pew. My Lynn Morgan, his voice carried, steady and clear. "I am a coward and a fool." My Lynn's eyes went wide. "I was scared to love again. Scared I'd fail you like I felt I failed Eleanor." He stepped closer. "But I don't regret one moment since you stepped off that stage. You made my house a home. You made me remember I am alive. You made me want to be better." The silence was absolute. "I let you walk away because I was afraid. That was wrong. That was cruel." His voice roughened. "I'm asking you, not as a duty, not as a contract, but as a man who loves his wife, come home." Dalton stood up, sneering. "Morgan, you're embarrassing yourself. For a woman who?" "For the woman I love," Arthur said, not looking at him. You judge her for where she's from. Judge me first for the fear in my own heart. She had the courage to hope when I had given up. That makes her braver than anyone in this room. My Lynn's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. You hurt me, I know. You let me go. It was the worst mistake I ever made. She stepped into the aisle. I'm scared, Arthur. Me too, he said, holding out his hand. So we'll be scared together. She took his hand, her slender fingers curling around his. The church erupted in gasps and whispers. But then old Gus began to clap. Slowly, others joined in. Not all of them, but enough. Outside, Arthur lifted my Lynn into his wagon. Let's go home. The word meant something different now, something built, not found. They rode out of town together, hand in hand. By June, the garden bloomed in wild abundance, the work of their hands growing. Evenings found them on the porch in two rocking chairs that sat close, their runners nearly touching. She would read aloud, and he would mostly watch her face. She'd stopped hiding, wore her hair back, and met the world directly. You're not listening, she'd accuse with a smile. I'm listening to your voice. That counts, he'd reply. They settled into rhythms. Mornings, she woke to coffee already made, his gift. Evenings, he found his clothes mended, hers. They worked the land side by side and slept in the same bed, the bedroom door staying open. Even the town slowly came around. Mrs. Hartwell arrived with a genuine apology and a preserves recipe. Marcus Dalton would offer a stiff nod when they passed. They were no longer a spectacle, they were an example. One evening, as they sat watching fireflies rise from the meadow, Samuel traced the stitching on a quilt she had brought from her homeland. Your mother would be proud. Yours, too, she replied. Next year, Arthur said, we'll plant twice as much. Maybe add some chickens. My Lynn's hand found his. Maybe a child. He went still, hope naked on his face. Maybe, she confirmed softly. The future, once terrifying, now beckoned. Not promised, nothing was promised, but possible. And possibility was enough. The ranch house glowed warm behind them, two people who had arrived broken building something whole, not despite their differences, but because of them. Pain had taught them the value of tenderness. Loss had taught them the courage of hope. Do you ever regret it? My Lynn asked softly. That first day. Not sending me back. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Every day, he said. She stiffened. I regret every day I wasted being afraid, he continued, turning to face her. I should have loved you from that first moment. My Lynn kissed him then, long and deep and unashamed. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Worth the wait? She asked. Worth everything. They sat in comfortable silence as night settled around them. Spring had come late that year to the Morgan Ranch, but when it finally arrived, slow and sure and earned through trial, it stayed. And so did they.